All right, so we're back out in the shop here. I'm gonna start taking the rear quarter panel, fender, whatever you want to call it, off to do the paint work. And also it kind of works out okay because even though you got to take off the rear quarter, it's not a big deal. I'll show you, it's pretty simple. I have to take it off anyways because I'm replacing these trail flares, the narrow flares, with their wider S models. And for the rear at least, the bodywork here, this has to come off in order to swap out the flares. So it had to come off anyways, so it worked out okay that I'm going to do it to paint it, so it's not a big deal. They come off really simple. There's 5 bolts. I believe they are the T40s. I don't know if you can see in here. There are one there, one there. There is one in behind your vent. The vent just comes off with 2 little screws, one in behind there. There's another bolt right here, and the 5th one is right there. You also have to take off 2 push pins. Those little Polaris famous push pins. There's one there, has to come out, and the other one is in the door opening right there. Okay, once all that stuff comes off, the quarter panel pops right out. Just pull it towards you. There are little clips right here that you just have to give it a snap and they'll pop out. I already took off the passenger side just to make it easier to explain to everybody. So there's what it's like with it off. There's the quarter panel here. So what I was saying, there's the inside of the quarter panel. And as you can see, the flares are held on inside by more of those stupid little push pins. One there, one here, and then it just kind of clips. And like I said, the quarter panel, I got it sitting upside down right now, but it snaps in. There's three clips here where it snaps into the rocker panel below the door. So here, here, and here. You just give it put it back on, just give it a bang, it'll pop back on when you're pulling it out. Just be careful, you don't want to snap the plastic on the inside of this panel. If you snap this plastic off, you're not gonna be able to get it back on. These clips, if you break them, you can get new clips. That's not a big deal, but try not to. Mine came off pretty easy, so it's not a big deal. So now that that's off, I'm gonna take off the driver's side as well, and then I'll come back and we'll explain how we're gonna start prepping it for paint. So both rear quarter panels are off now. So the machine, I just basically shoved it ahead to the end of my garage. The quarter panels and the flares are sitting up on some sawhorses. You can use a table, workbench, whatever you want. I suggest whenever you're doing something like this, take an extra 15 minutes at the beginning and just set everything up. Get your tools ready, your tables ready, workbench, whatever. There's nothing worse than trying to do something like this amidst a pile of junk if you were working on a project before or working on your car or your truck or whatever, and you're losing nuts and bolts and clips. I realize not everybody has a huge shop. I certainly don't, but an organized shop goes a long way. So do yourself a favor, keep that stuff separate and clean. And what else I did was when I took it all apart, I put all the hardware for the rear quarter panel in a baggie here. I'm going to label that with a piece of masking tape. There's the vents. Nothing's going to get lost, or at least that's the plan anyways. So what we need to do now, we need to get these flares off because like I say, I'm putting on S flares, and even if you weren't, you're going to want to remove them to paint the quarter panel anyways. They're simple. So we're going to pop out these clips. Where's the other one? There's 2 of them here at least, and 3, sorry. And we're going to pop these flares off, and I'll do that, and then I'll come back and we'll show you the next step. Once those push pins are popped out, there's the flares are just clipped in here. I don't know if I can do it with one hand or not, but you basically push that in. Okay, see what I'm doing? Push it in that direction and lift the flare up at the same time, and they'll pop out. They're just little tabs basically. Okay, just don't go reefing on it and break them off. They will hold your flare nice and tight where the push pins aren't. Okay, I'm gonna do that now. All right, both the flares are off the rear fenders now. So now you can see a little clearer why I needed to repaint this fender. This is supposed to be red, and it just started flaking off. And as you can see, the decals are just taking the paint right with it. It's not bonded to the plastic at all. But anyways, we'll get into that more when we get doing the bodywork. The next thing I need to do is take these outside and just hit them with some water and a brush just to get all this mud and crap out. First of all, you know, you don't want to be making things any dirtier than you have to. And when you go to paint, you don't want any of that dirt blowing out and getting into your paint and ruining your paint job. And then this side, the reason I have to paint, that's the side I laid down in the ditch. So we're going to use a heat gun when we come back in and peel these graphics off so I can prep the paint. The other side, it'll probably just peel off without a heat gun. Now, some of you may be wondering, on this one here, is it possible for me to save that graphic? Because it's a little bit dusty, but it's not in bad shape. The answer is yes and no. This graphic obviously is screwed up because it was the one peeling. What I'm afraid of is where this paint's peeling, if I keep peeling back and back and back and back, is it going to get up into there? And if the paint's not adhered properly down here, which means in my eyes this panel wasn't prepped properly, it's probably is likely to peel up here as well. So that decal I think is $19 Canadian. It's probably cheaper in the States. I'm just gonna paint the whole panel and replace the decal. Nothing would tick me off more than to get it all done and then have it start flaking up here next year after all this work. So I'm gonna bite the bullet, pay the 19 bucks. It's just a sticker, stick it on. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, so I'm gonna get these washed. I'll start hitting them with the heat gun, taking off the decals, and then I'll come back and we'll carry on to the next step. All right, we're back again. The decals are all off. They came off fairly easy with the heat gun. They gave me a little bit of problem here just because the decals were chewed up, so they naturally came off in small pieces. But the other side, it came off clean with the heat gun. Now, a little side note, this just pertains to my vehicle, but anyways, where the paint was all flaking off down here, I hit it with a razor blade lightly and it was flaked off easy till about here. And then it seemed like there was good adhesion. So what I'm going to do is when I sand the panel, I'll just blend that in there before I prime it, and there's no need to take all this paint off if it's adhered properly. Now, a little side note, a lot of people don't believe that paint can stick to plastic, and they complain about, you know, why do they paint these plastic pieces? What a lot of people don't understand is paint will stick to plastic. It's not an issue. There's hundreds and thousands of cars out there with plastic bumpers, and the Cadillacs have plastic fenders. Every Cobalt, Sunfire, Corvette, Montana vans, half of them are plastic. The Corvettes used to be fiberglass. A lot of them are plastic now. So the whole key to it is that you have to prep it properly. I don't care who paints your panel for you. If it's not prepped properly, the paint's not going to stick. So the first and foremost thing is get the panel clean, clean, clean. Also, you want to make sure if you use SC1 or Armor All or tire foam or anything for your plastics, as I love to do too, that stuff is potent. It will kill a paint job. So get it off of there. That's why one of the reasons I took off the flares as well. Give these a good cleaning, whether it be soap and water. You can use thinners after the fact. An automotive wax and grease remover, that's a 1 quart container. It's not super expensive. I think it's like 12 bucks. You could use alcohol, but you're better off using something that's made for automotive. Do not use household-based cleaners. Don't use Spray 9, Fantastic, Mr. Clean, anything like that. Don't use any of that stuff. Stick with automotive stuff. It's got to be compatible. And like I say, if it's not prepped properly, it's not going to stick, and you're wasting your time. So what we're going to do now is I'm trying to keep this something that a home user can do. I'm not going to get into the proper professional way to do it where you need thousands of dollars worth of chemicals and equipment. That's not going to interest anybody here. If you're already an auto body professional, you're not going to be watching this. You know how to fix it. So we're going to keep it a little bit simplified. It'll still get the job done. It'll still give you great results. What I suggest is using a DA sander or any sort of vibrating oscillating sander. Sand this with 320 to 400 grit. Okay, don't go any coarser than that. It will just make the plastic all fluffy, and you don't want that. The reason I say even go as coarse as 320 is because I'm going to prime this whole panel with an automotive primer, both of them, because of the damage here. I've got to get these scratches out, and I don't know if you can see, but there's a little indentation there from the rocks and so on. So the primer will help fill that. So I'm gonna get sanding this now. When it's all sanded and done, I'm gonna give it another cleaning, and then I'll get back on with the videos again. All right, so the parts are finally sanded. That was about an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of work, but you wanna be thorough with this. You don't wanna miss any nooks and crannies. It'll come back to bite you later. And sure enough, as I predicted, this section here on that whole body side, I hit it with the air gun and I was blowing, and I could blow the paint right off it until it got to about here, and then it was adhering good. So I just feathered it out. There's no point in stripping all that, but excuse me, definitely some sort of contamination from the factory on that one, but we got her fixed up now. This side, the paint was all sticking really good. The only reason the black is showing here is because that's where I had all the scuff from the rocks before that I had to sand out. So it's ready to prime now. Now I'm gonna give everybody a few tips here. First of all, once you're done sanding, grab a Scotch Brite pad. I prefer red. That's the grit I like that. They come about 5 inches by 10 inches or so square. I cut them into small pieces. They're like $1.50 at any hardware store or auto body supply store. Anyways, use that after, and what you're gonna do is you're just gonna go along in all these little edges and corners here. Any place that you might see a little bit of shiny paint still kicking around. I'm not worried about in here, that's covered. I mean, I don't care if the paint adheres in there or not, to be honest with you. You're never gonna see it again. But on the outside, you wanna make sure it's all totally scuffed, okay? And once again, cleanliness, I can't push that enough, that it's gotta be clean and no contamination, no oils, no silicones. Now I was telling you before about the wax and grease remover that I use to wipe it down. I've already done that. What I do, a little trick that I forgot to tell you, I find I put it in a small bottle like this. I don't know if that was a small bottle of dish soap, or it might have been that finished stuff for the dishwasher. I can't remember. Anyways, I clean the bottle out really good. I put it in there, and there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it's got a nice little top that you can just kind of squirt some of the stuff out on the rag. I use these blue shop rags that I think everybody and their uncle uses. They're great. One thing you don't want to do, and the reason for putting it in this bottle mainly, is you don't want to hold the rag on top of it and tip it upside down and like that and then use the rag. The problem is, first of all, it's okay the first time you do it, but once the rag is dirty and you're wiping these parts down, now the rag has the contaminants or the silicone or whatever on them. You take the rag back, put it on the bottle, rag gets wet, stuff splashes back. Now you've got contamination in your wax and grease remover. You never want to do that. You always want to pour this onto the rag, okay? Never put the rag on top of that. I know it sounds anal, I know it sounds fussy. I've been doing body and paint for 30 years, and I tell you, you screw up 1 or 2 paint jobs and have to redo them again, and you learn from that mistake pretty quick. So just trust me on that one. Secondly, the products that I'm going to be using are professional auto body and auto paint products, okay? You can do this with rattle cans if you want. I really don't recommend it. If you've gone through all this work and all you've got is spray cans and rattle cans, do yourself a favor. Take these parts to a local body shop, and probably for about 75 bucks, I bet you they'd paint the 2 of those and be done with it. Because if you spray these with spray cans, A, it's not going to stick. B, it's going to look like crap. And you've put all this time and work into it so far, you don't want to screw it up at the end. So if you don't have proper spray equipment, and when I say spray equipment, I mean, like actual guns. They don't have to be high-end ones. That's a medium. That's like a DeVilbiss. It's $300 gun, but you can get away with a $60 gun. You just don't use rattle cans, okay? Use an actual spray gun. Use actual automotive primer, a catalyzed primer, not a lacquer primer. Okay, so we're gonna get this stuff ready for priming, and I'll be back. All right, so I got everything set up, ready for one last final wipe down with the wax and grease remover. I cheated a little bit, and I prepped my my new lower door bottoms as well, because if you guys remember in the earlier video, they were going to be painted red. That's the only other thing to be painted, so I might as well do them all at once. There's no point mixing up paint twice. But I decided to prime them as well. They are a black powder coat, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's really thin. My other ones that I had from UTV Giant held up fine, so it's probably not a problem. But seeing how I broke through to the aluminum, I'm going to hit it with some etch primer and then some primer sealer just to make sure the paint sticks well to it. Another little tip. You can see I got these, they're just cheap little sawhorses here, and I made up some little stands out of 2x4s and 4x4s. Whenever I paint or prime parts, I can't always, but I try to set the parts up as if they were oriented on the vehicle. And the reason is because it's easier to visualize what is seen and what's not. For example, here when I'm painting, if I don't get, you know, up under here 100%, I know the flares kind of cover it, so it's not a big deal. Whereas if this thing's sitting upside down and I get disoriented a little bit and I miss, you know, here with my paint, then, you know, it's going to show when you have it on the vehicle. So try to set it up the way that you have it. Now, the doors are obviously the exception. Because they're a big, fairly flat panel, I'm going to lay them flat like this. It allows the paint to flow out a little better. I can lay it on a little bit heavier. Because I'm painting in a garage, there may be a little bit of dirt in the paint. There's going to be graphics over it anyway, so it's not a big deal. But if there is, I'm using base coat, clear coat, so it'll buff out. It's not the end of the world. I do want to show you what I use for primer. Remember I said to use automotive primer. I use this Nason product. It's made by DuPont. It's their budget line, and you know what? I've had nothing but good luck with it. It's a good high build primer. You don't need to buy a gallon of it and a quart of the catalyst or the activator. You can buy a quart of the primer and you know, a half pint of the catalyst. Or if you go to a body shop, they may pour you off some for a few bucks. But like I say, use good products, use stuff designed for automotive. You don't want to go using you know, the rattle can stuff here. That's fine for painting, you know, little tree ornaments, or sorry, lawn ornaments or kids' bicycles or something. You don't want to use it on a automotive type vehicle, especially something that gets beat up pretty good like a razor. Okay, I'm gonna mask up and throw some primer on that, and then I'll be back. All right, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit and retract one of my statements about rattle cans. There is a time when you can use rattle cans and it's 100% acceptable. And that time is when you are spraying on adhesion promoter. This is what you need to spray on any bare plastic in order for the paint, well, the primer specifically, to grip, okay? So that bare plastic there that's sanded, it has a mechanical tooth because I sanded it, but you do need to spray this adhesion promoter on it. A can of it is like 12 bucks. It lasts forever. You only put on a very thin coat, follow the directions to a T. You don't need much of this stuff. It's a clear primer, sprays on, it flashes off in like 2 minutes, and then you have to prime it, I believe, within 10 minutes after that. I won't need to spray it on the doors here. They're a different type of primer. They're a self-etching primer used on those. But anywhere there's bare plastic, even something like that, where I broke through the paint into the bare plastic, give it a shot of this primer. All right, or else your other gray primer sealer won't stick properly. It'll look beautiful, everything will be fine, and you may find your paint flaking off like it did on me here in the first place. So that's one thing I forgot, and that's one time when a rattle can is perfectly acceptable, because this little rattle can will cover like 10 of these things. You don't use very much at all. Okay, time to prime. All right, so I've let the primed parts sit excuse me, overnight. Make sure the primer's set up really good. I just have the one quarter panel here on display right now. Just want to show everybody what I do next. I spray what's called a guide coat on it. The guide coat is just a very light misting of like a black or a dark colored paint. And you want to use like a lacquer base paint. You don't want to use enamel. Definitely don't use something like Trim Clad or anything gooey like that. You want just an enamel, or sorry, a lacquer spray bomb, and give it a light mist. The purpose of the guide coat is so that when you're sanding, obviously with everything being all gray in one color, it's hard to tell when you missed a spot. So when you're sanding, if you still see the black guide coat, you know you've missed a spot, or you have like a low spot, a little divot or a dent or a chip or something that you need to work on. It just helps a visual. I'll show you what I use for guide coat. It's actually called guide coat, but like I say, you don't have to buy that. Another thing that I've used is a very light misting of, I think it's called black satin, right here. That'll work as a guide coat as well, or any just cheap lacquer paint. It doesn't have to be even black. It could be just any color other than gray. Once again, do not use enamel. We're gonna go start sanding it now with 400 grit. I use a little palm sander with stickets. You can use just 400 grit sandpaper and do it by hand if you want. This is quicker and I have the equipment, so I'm going to use that. Okay, once everything's sanded, we'll get it clean again and set up for paint, and I'll get back to everybody. All right, we're finally ready to start spraying some color on the parts now. So these have been all sanded with 400 grit. You can go up to 600 if you really want to. You don't have to, especially for an off-road machine. If you're doing a car, or especially something that's a little more picky or more show quality, then I would suggest go 600 wet. 400 dry is fine for what I'm doing. So everything's been sanded, it's been blown off. I've blown them off like 3 times. I've evacuated the dust out of the building. I have an exhaust unit up in the corner that sucks all my dust out, and also paint fumes when I'm spraying. So the garage is, for the most part, clean. The dust is gone. It's been wiped down twice more with wax and grease remover. A little tip, when you're wiping it down, especially at this stage, do not touch the parts with your hands. If you have to hold the parts for any reason, stop them moving, hold them on the inside. Oils from your fingerprint, from your fingers, can contaminate the surface and give you adhesion problems. So don't touch them with your hands at this point. Wipe them down with wax and grease remover. How you do it is you have 2 rags, one wet, you wipe on, one you follow, you wipe off to dry, and so on. And don't be afraid to use new towels. Like, don't keep using the old ones. The reason you do that is because the idea is the wet will float any contaminants to the surface, the dry will wipe them off the surface. If you just wipe it down with wet, then it's just going to evaporate and leave the same contaminants on the surface that were there in the first place. So I have everything ready. Another little tip, cover up everything in your shop that you don't want to get covered with overspray. Okay, especially clear coat, that stuff will fly everywhere. So cover up anything that you don't want to have overspray on it. If it's stuff that you don't care, then that's fine, but otherwise cover it up. So I have my paint here. This is some old PPG paint that I had. I think it's from like 1995, but my garage is climate controlled. Nothing freezes. It'll still be fine. It's base coat. We're going to go base clear. So you mix it 1-to-1 with the base to the reducer. Okay. When you spray on the color, it is the base coat. It is strictly that. It is strictly color. It provides no build and no protection for anything. So lay it on thin, lay it on in multiple coats. Don't try to get it all covered in one shot. A red like that should take 3 to 4 coats for full coverage. If you doubt that you have enough paint on it, or you're concerned, throw 1 more coat on. It's not going to shine. It's base coat. It'll be flat. It'll be a matte finish. Okay, it's strictly for color. After it flashes up for a half hour to 45 minutes, by the time you get everything cleaned up, then you're going to put on 3 coats of clear coat. That's what gives you your UV protection, your rust protection, protects it from flakes, chips, and everything. So like I said, when you put on the base coat, don't try to build it up. It's not for protection. It's strictly for color. You don't need to lay it on thick. If you get a run in your base coat, you're doing something very, very wrong. Put it on thin coats. The first coat, you'll see right through it. Second coat, it'll look better, but you'll see spots where you see through it. Third coat should be full coverage. And then the 4th coat for good measure if you want. Okay, so I'm going to get started spraying, and with any luck, I'll show you what it looks like with just base coat on it before I put some clear on. All right, so as I said, here are the panels just in base coat. I gave them 4 coats. The first coat was just like what they call a guide coat or a mist coat. Second was a medium wet, and then the last 2 were both full wets. And as I said, they don't shine. They're like a, I don't know, I guess it'd be the equivalent of a satin. Okay, about the same finish that the roll cage is on the RZR, about that shiny. The camera kind of makes it look a little shinier than it is, but it's really not. Okay, so you just want to make sure you got full coverage on everything. There you can see the dullness of it, right? See, there's no reflection. And these were done about, I'd say about half an hour ago. I just went in, cleaned everything up, back out. Now they're ready to clear. My clear is mixed up in the gun. I'm going to give them 2 to 3 coats of clear. That's a judgment call. My first coat of clear I put on medium, and then my second coat is a full, a closed coat, which means it's full gloss. And I judge from there. If I think that that's good enough, I'll leave it at that. But a 3rd coat doesn't hurt anything, other than if you're in a dirty environment, such as a garage or whatever, like I'm painting in. Sometimes a 3rd coat, you'll just add dirt to it, and it just makes it look worse, and you're not really gaining anything from it. But for UV protection, a 3rd coat certainly does help for sure. Okay, we're going to get spraying, and I'll show you the finished version when it's done. All right, so for all intents and purposes, the panels are done. They each have 3 coats of clear on them. I'm gonna let them sit. I finished them about half an hour ago. I had the exhaust fan on, letting the overspray and fumes clear out here. I didn't want to choke myself. I'm gonna let them sit, excuse me, probably 3 to 3.5 hours before I move them. And even then, I'll just gently set them aside, pull the RZR back in the garage, and call it a day. One thing I will point out, I don't know if you can tell, but the door panels, there's quite a bit of dirt in them. And when I say dirt, it's just dust that floats in the air. There's really nothing you can do about it unless you're in a controlled environment, such as a spray booth. You know, in here, it's I got the heater blowing up top. I have a garage heater there that blows. So that's blowing air, which moves around stuff. My compressor is right there. It's blowing air to cool itself down, and you know, it's just not a very sterile environment. Having said that, these doors are going to be probably 75% covered with decals anyways, but I think for good measure, I'll give them a little shot with the wet sandpaper. Probably 1500 grit, hit them with the buffer quick just to knock some of that down, and it'll look great. The side panels, they came out pretty good. Because they're vertical, the dust doesn't get a chance to really sit on them as much, other than the top surfaces, and really they're not that bad. They're all in all pretty shiny. So anyways, hopefully that helped everybody out, and seeing how this is done. And the next installment will be bolting these puppies back up and getting the S flares back on. All right, we'll talk to you later.